King Leopold II ruled over Belgium from 1865 to 1909. Today, the memory of his reign still lives on, and he is glorified with golden statues of his likeness in every major city in Belgium. In history classes, each generation is taught that he was a humanitarian who brought Christianity and the wonders of civilization to the Congo Free State. However, the truth has been kept away from the Belgian people. The reality is that King Leopold II is responsible for the murder and mutilation of 10 million Congolese people. This just may be the biggest cover-up in European history. Hi everybody and welcome back to the Dark History Podcast. Hope everybody is well. I'm Rob, your host as always. For episode 21, as you may have guessed, is the dark biography of King Leopold II of Belgium. We've not looked at an evil person for a while, so I thought, who better to do than the person I spoke briefly about way back in episode 1. Now, I will warn you, this will get dark, and there will be descriptions of death and mutilations in this episode, but if you're a long-time listener, you know that's pretty much all we talk about here. So without further ado, please sit back and relax for more dark history. Leopold II was born in 1835 to King Leopold I and Louise Marie of Orleans. They were the very first royal family of Belgium, because the country was just 5 years old. For thousands of years, that territory had been conquered by nearby Netherlands, France, Germany, and even Luxembourg. They were the newly independent country that had yet to form a unique national identity. Leopold II had two younger siblings, called Philippe and Charlotte. Their family life was dysfunctional to say the least. Soon after Charlotte's birth in 1844, King Leopold I met a 16-year-old girl named Arcadie Claret. He was 54 years old at the time, but that didn't stop him from having an affair with a teenage girl. Claret would go on to become a baroness, and her sons, Georges and Arthur, were made into barons. There were rumours that King Leopold I had several other affairs, so the exact number of half-siblings Leopold II has out there is actually unknown. Queen Louise Marie was understandably miserable in her marriage, and she chose to let her anger out on her children. She would make fun of young Leopold's large nose that he inherited from his father. She told her son his face was disfigured and that he had the beak of a bird. In 1853, when he was 18 years old, Leopold had an arranged marriage with Marie Henriette of Austria. Since he had never actually seen what a loving marriage looked like, the teen couple were incredibly awkward around each other. Someone in the Belgian royal court had commented that seeing them together was like watching a nun and a stable boy. People thought that this was hilariously accurate. The phrase was repeated amongst everyone who knew them. Apparently his parents cared so little of Leopold that they never bothered to tell him about the birds and the bees. Leopold's aunt, Queen Victoria of England, had a great marriage with her husband Albert. She apparently gave her nephew lots of sex advice, which was probably exactly as awkward as you might imagine. Leopold II and Marie Henriette eventually figured it out though, because they had two daughters together. When Leopold I died in 1865, Leopold II ascended to the throne as the new king of Belgium. Since his personal life was dysfunctional, it's really no surprise that his happiness and satisfaction came from attaining material things. According to William II, the ruler of Germany, he was together watching a parade with Leopold II in Berlin, when he commented, "There is really nothing left for us kings, except money." Before he died, King Leopold II's father made 50 attempts to conquer a colony for Belgium, but he had always failed. It was clear to him that the power other countries like England, France, Germany and the United States had was thanks to colonisation. Leopold I believed that without colonising an African nation, they would never be considered one of the larger world powers. Leopold II picked up where his father left off, but he did not want to conquer a nation on behalf of Belgium. He planned to make an entire country his own personal property. This way he could have complete control and have direct access to profits. He knew that if he was honest about his greedy intentions, none of the other major powers would agree to let him colonize an entire country all for himself. So he told everyone that it was his mission to spread Christianity in the Congo. He wanted to convert and civilize those poor godless souls. So I suppose it's a good time to do a quick recap from the first episode. Obviously, if you've listened to it, you'll know a little bit more about the Scramble for Africa. But for the purposes of new people to the podcast, or to people who haven't heard about the Scramble for Africa, very quickly, the Scramble for Africa is the name given to the way in which European countries brought nearly all of the African continent under its control as a part of their separate empires. The Scramble for Africa began in the 1880s, and by 1914, the only African countries not controlled by European powers were Liberia and Ethiopia. In the 1870s, Africans controlled 90% of Africa. Any areas that were controlled by European countries were on the coast. However, that began to change once missionaries, explorers and traders reported on the interior of Africa and the riches of raw materials there. Europeans wanted these materials for their industries, and slowly, countries such as Great Britain, France, Spain, Germany, Belgium, and Italy began to claim land in Africa. In order to successfully take over the continent, European powers had to be able to construct railroads and to sail steamships on rivers into the interior. Once this was done, Europeans established control over trade, and the governments conquered the people who lived there. Many African groups such as the Ashanti, the Fulani, Tuareg, Opobo, Mbele, and Shona fought to control their lands. However, they were defeated by the European forces. One exception was in North Africa, where Italy tried to take control of Ethiopia. The Ethiopians defeated the Italians in 1896. Unfortunately, the Italians later did take over the land, but it lasted only a few years. The invading powers drew boundaries between their colonies, with no thought of ethnic groups and kingdoms that already lived there. They also did not know much about the people they conquered. This led to confusion and difficulty in ruling, and as a result, the Europeans reorganized Africans into groups they could understand and control. The African continent was changed completely by Europeans. Africans lost control over most of their own affairs. They were affected by new diseases that were introduced. They fought many wars, and their traditional ways of life were changed forever. The European countries did give up control of their colonies over time, but they left many problems behind. The people of Africa have spent many years trying to restore their economies and establishing stable countries of their own. You can by all means go back to episode 1 for a bit more of an in-depth look at this, from when the Europeans began to appear in Africa, right up to more or less present day. Yes, that was a shameless plug, and no, you don't have to go back to listen to that episode before listening to this. Anyway, so, in 1884, Leopold met with 14 other European nations at the Berlin Conference. He pitched his idea of colonising the Congo, and claimed that he wanted to spend his own fortune to bring missionaries to Africa, out of the goodness of his own heart. He also promised that the rest of Europe could freely explore and trade from his country as they pleased. The Congo was known for being incredibly dangerous and difficult to colonise. The rainforest and savannas are filled with gorillas, lions, leopards and wolves. The Congo River has man-eating crocodiles and hippopotamus, and the insects carry deadly diseases. In general, it was a very wild place, and not many Europeans wanted to live there. If Leopold II really wanted to take on the challenge, the other world powers didn't see anything wrong with it. A Welsh explorer and journalist named Henry Morton Stanley already had years of experience in Africa. He was sent on a project by several different newspapers in the United Kingdom, and he'd become an expert in the continent. Through his writings, he tried to convince Queen Victoria that despite all the difficulties, he believed it was worthwhile to colonise the Congo. His suggestions never made any impact until King Leopold II found Stanley's work. In 1879, the king sent him on a mission to colonise the Congo. Henry Morton Stanley used parlour tricks to convince the African tribal chiefs that white men were invincible. He used a battery-powered contraption to make his grip so strong, Congolese men almost collapsed from the mere handshake. Stanley claimed that white men could rip trees out of the ground with their bare hands. He also held a magnifying glass in the sunlight and used its reflection to light his cigar, claiming that the white man had power over the sun. And finally, he handed a gun to a native man. He instructed him to step back several yards and try to shoot him. Stanley had taken the gunpowder and bullets out beforehand, of course, and when the young man pulled the trigger, Stanley would double over, dramatically, only to take his shoes off and shake the bullet onto the ground. He claimed that white men were spirits who could not be killed, no matter how hard they tried, and that the bullets would pass right through them. This was enough to terrify the chiefs into signing his contract that declared King Leopold II as the new owner of the Congo. Of course, the Congolese people had no idea what the contract actually said, but it served as a legal document in the eyes of the European people. Leopold wanted to keep up the illusion that he was going to do good in the country, so he went as far as naming it the Congo Free State. Henry Morton Stanley published a book about his journey through Africa, called Through the Dark Continent. He was able to go on to lecture tours around London, and he was eventually knighted in the year 1899. Leopold II truly was paying for all of the startup expenses to colonise the Congo out of his own pocket. He appointed governor-generals to manage the various territories of the country. Leopold's men eventually discovered that the rainforest had a plentiful supply of rubber trees. This was like stumbling across a gold mine. At the time, there was a huge demand for natural rubber in order to make tyres, but there was a very small supply. The only problem, of course, was finding a way to pay for manual labour. Leopold II ordered his men to enslave the Congolese people. Each of the governor-generals had their own tactics to achieve this. Usually, they set villages on fire so that there was nowhere for anybody to hide. They would shoot and capture the women of the village and tell the men that if they did not each bring back 15 kilograms of rubber by the end of the day, they would kill their wives and daughters. The Congo Free State was anything but free. King Leopold II believed that all these people were his personal slaves, and he could do whatever he wanted with them. King Leopold personally handed out bonuses to commanders if they could produce more rubber, by any means necessary. Leopold also began to grow his own private army in the Congo, called the Force Publique. When his men were destroying a village, they would pick out the tallest and strongest looking young man to recruit them as soldiers. These captured soldiers were instructed to systematically kill anybody who disobeyed the orders of the Governor-General, but they were also told they were not allowed to waste any ammunition, and that they must kill a man with a single bullet. They were required to bring back one severed hand for every bullet they fired. If they did not, they would be killed by their generals. This led to soldiers cutting the hands off people that were still alive whenever they wasted ammunition. Meanwhile in Europe, people had no idea what was actually going on. But word did get around that King Leopold II needed more soldiers to help with his Christian mission to colonise the Congo. Hundreds of young men from Belgium, Italy, Norway, Sweden and Denmark all signed up to join the Force Publique. They were taught that these black natives were animals, not a full human like them, so they should feel no guilt about killing them when necessary. After a while, these men became desensitized to killing. Some of the soldiers would gut people and pull out their entrails, or slice off a group of men's genitals only to hang them in a row. Some of the Governor-Generals wrote letters to King Leopold II about these scenes, because they were actually proud of the brutality. They believed that the worse they treated the Congolese people, the harder they worked. Over time, King Leopold's men managed to enslave the entire population of the Congo. Even though he promised the rest of the world could visit the Congo whenever they wanted, King Leopold II became very nervous when they learned about an Arabian merchant coming to gather some rubber for themselves. He did not want to lose his monopoly over the industry, so he declared that he needed to go to war with the so-called Arab slave traders in order to free his Congolese people. This sparked a 2-year Congo-Arab War. In 1895, an English merchant named Charles Stokes was on a mission for the Germans to travel to the Congo to purchase rubber. He was hung by the force publique without receiving a trial. Germany and Britain were outraged that he was killed without ever committing any crime. Leopold was forced to pay substantial fines to both governments for violating the treaty, and the incident was called the Stokes Affair. However, paying these fines was just a drop in the bucket. King Leopold II made a profit of 220 million francs, which would be worth more than $1 billion today. Leopold II hired a team of propaganda writers to publish books and articles about what a great job he was doing. None of these writers had ever actually travelled to the Congo Free State, but they were happy to glorify their king's Christian mission. However, journalists from Great Britain and the United States were beginning to travel to the Congo Free State and reported what they saw. In the year of 1890, an American Civil War veteran named George Washington Williams visited the Congo Free State, and he was horrified. He wrote an open letter to King Leopold II and recounted the horrors he witnessed while visiting the country. The king never replied. A man named Edmund Dean Morrill worked as a clerk at a shipping firm in Liverpool, England. Belgian ships would come and go delivering rubber to Liverpool from the Congo. Morrill knew that it wouldn't be possible for Belgium to produce such a high volume of rubber unless they were using slave labour. He began to investigate, and when he discovered the horrors about what was actually happening, he wrote several anonymous articles for a British newspaper called The Speaker, exposing the truth about what he saw. He wrote that it was the greatest crime that had been committed in the history of the world. In 1901, the shipping company offered Morrill a job to manage the shipments of rubber to and from the Congo. They were willing to pay him a huge salary in exchange for his silence. He turned it down and became a full-time journalist instead. He became so passionate about the cause that he began to publish his own newspaper called the West African Mail with any new information he found. In 1906, he published a book called The Red Rubber. Another journalist, named Roger Casement, was sent to interview the people of the Congo to get their testimonies about the human rights abuse in the country. He realised that it was crucial to convincing the white Christian missionaries to come forward with their stories, because they had been there from the beginning, and they could prove that King Leopold II was aware of the atrocities. After Roger Casement's report was published, King Leopold knew that if he did not respond with his own inquiry, this would be the end of him. He sent his own international commission to the Congo, in hopes that he could bribe them. He thought he could pay them off to publish whatever he wanted them to say. This totally backfired. A Christian missionary named John Harris had been living in the Congo Free State for years, and his wife devoted their lives to helping the Congolese people. When King Leopold's International Commission showed up, John Harris was ready for him. He gathered a group of Congolese people who testified to the death, torture, mutilation, rape, and enslavement that they suffered at the hands of King Leopold's men. His wife, Alice Harris, was a photographer, and she was able to present them with photographic evidence of the horrors they had seen. When the International Commission returned to Belgium, they published a 50-page report on all the human rights abuse they found in the Congo and submitted it to King Leopold II. Once he realised that he could no longer get away with his lies, Leopold ordered the Congo Free State records to be burnt, so that there was no evidence of his crimes. In 1908, the Congo became a Belgian colony, but they didn't seize it from the king. Instead, they paid him 50 million francs for the purchase. He died just 1 year later, in 1909. Once the Belgian government visited the Congo, They found far more profitable resources than just rubber. There was diamond, gold and ivory that could be sold for massive profits. The government ended slavery and employed the Congolese people to work for wages instead. Very soon after, Belgium became extremely wealthy. The city of Brussels now has some of the most breathtaking architecture in the world, complete with golden statues of King Leopold II, all because of the money he brought from the Congo. But the Belgian government had a decision to make. What do they tell the public? Leopold II had lied to his people for so long, and they looked up to him like a father figure who brought glory to the country. Not only would citizens be disappointed, but it would make Belgium look terrible to the outside world. Their nation was still less than 100 years old at the time. England and the United States had already outlawed slavery in the 1800s, so in their short history, their king had already managed to take steps backwards in humanitarian progress. The Belgian government chose to allow their people to continue to believe the lie that King Leopold II had built for himself. They taught their children that there was never any slavery in the Congo Free State, and that everything King Leopold II did was wonderful. This lie was retold for generation after generation, to the point where it became their new truth, and part of their cultural identity. Before his death, in 1897, Leopold II created a human zoo at his summer estate. He built a model African village and captured 267 Congolese people to live there. Belgian people showed up to gawk at them, throw peanuts and bananas over the fences, as if they were monkeys. These people were forced to stay outdoors in these villages, in all kinds of weather. 7 of those people died of influenza and pneumonia. After he died, the king's estate became the Royal Museum of Central Africa, and it continued to glorify Leopold II's achievements in colonisation. Decades after his death, in 1958, the government of Belgium even went so far as to replicate the human zoo at the Brussels World Fair, putting Congolese people on display like animals once again. So there you go, King Leopold II. I don't think you realise the vastness of the cover-up surrounding this man. This is why people are only just beginning to learn of the atrocities committed in the Congo. But people believe, to this day, none of this happened. This man was a monster of personal greed and cruelty. Don't get me wrong, as I always say, nearly every Western nation has some history of slavery and genocide. But in most Belgian classes, they will never hear the truth about King Leopold II. They will say slavery never happened in the Congo. And also, since the records were destroyed, we will never know just how many people Leopold was responsible for killing. Some estimate that it's roughly 4 million, while others believe it's as high as 10. Somewhere between 70 to 90% of the total population was wiped out. The people of Congo were bought like merchandise and owned by the king, making the entire Congolese population slaves to King Leopold. And, on the orders of King Leopold, thousands of Congolese were either hung, had their hands amputated, for failure to meet daily ratios of sap collection for rubber making. King Leopold took over 905,000 square miles of African rainforest, with their vast mineral resources for his personal use. What is often today described in international criminal justice discourse as the command and responsibility fell squarely on King Leopold. For example, he commanded his generals to cut off the heads of the men and hang them in the villages, have sexual intercourse with the native women, and hang children and women on crosses. He ordered the cutting off of heads and hands, flogged them to death, starvation, burning of villages, severe punishment for those who did not meet quotas for rubber. The sad part, though, is that despite the overwhelming evidence of such brutality, King Leopold was never held criminally liable for the genocide and ills in the Congo. But in the age of the internet, it's become more difficult for Belgians to ignore the reality of what happened. In 2018, the curators of the Royal Museum of Central Africa finally decided to change the exhibits to honour the lives lost by the natives of the Congolese people. However, Congolese people who visit the exhibit said that it's still not enough, and that as long as the story is told from the perspective of the white Belgian person, the country will never show its full truth about the monstrous deeds of King Leopold II. Anyway, if you liked the episode, please drop us a review. It really does help the podcast out to get out to new listeners. If you think your friends and family may like it, share it with them. Links to TikTok, YouTube, Insta, and the show email are below. If you've been listening for a while and not subscribed, please do it. In that way, you never miss an episode. So with all that out the way, please join me for episode 22 and more dark history.